Hello and welcome to another Spending Window podcast. I'm Dan Wendell, co-author of The Spending Window, a book about how intermittent spending can improve your finances. And today we have a guest. The guest is going to be talking about his perspective in the finance world. It's really a good one. I actually shared it with my co-author, Angelo. He said, we got to have him on the show. And speaking of that, let me bring in Angelo, Dr. Angelo De Rosalia, my co-host. Whoops. And I got our guest Brandon here, Brandon Austin from Rinkydoo Finance. Angelo, I told you about Brandon and his website. You took a look and you thought this is going to be good. Why do you think Brandon's going to be a good guest? And he's on now, so he's listening and can make sure he follows in your footsteps pretty well. What do you say?
Yeah, absolutely, Dan. Great to be here this morning. I'm happy that Brandon had a chance to join us. Um, at intermittent, the home of intermittent spending, we always talk about the spending window and spending habits. And I was researching Rinkydoo Finance, and Brandon lists his core values on his website. And I think it's worthwhile to take a moment and let me just read you his core values and how they mesh so well with our beliefs here. Number one, anyone can become good with money. Number two, money doesn't have to be a dirty subject. Number three, getting rich quick is not the goal of investing. Number four, personal finance is about more than just money. And number five, it's never too late or too early to start caring about your personal finances. I mean, this is so in line with the values of the spendingwindow.com and intermittent spending, particularly in relation to personal finance being more than just money, and getting rich quick is not the goal of investing. After reading this, I said, we need to talk to Brandon and learn a little bit more about what he's telling his listeners and his audience.
Absolutely. So without further ado, Brandon, why don't you just introduce yourself real quick and we'll get started with some questions.
Sure. First of all, thank you guys very much for having me. It's means a lot to be able to come on your platform. So I appreciate it. So I started blogging about personal finance in April of 2020. So it was right at the height of the pandemic, really, and it had been something I wanted to do for a while. And I suddenly had all this free time, so I decided, what, let me just get started. And it's been a lot of fun since. I've met a lot of really people on here. I've written a lot of blog posts that seem to have resonated with people. And like you said, my core values, those are the things I try to communicate in every single post. So I try to weave those, I think, encouraging messages into everything I write.
Well, I think the core values were big. That's got me too. I want to show one of them in detail. You said about controlling finances. This is your quote, and I love it. Taking control of your finances changes everything about the way you live. And I truly believe that is accurate. And I want you to expound on it a little bit more.
Yeah. So, please, I got my finances under control. I had a lot of anxiety around spending, and not only just spending, but also the activities that were associated with spending. So, I would go out to eat and I would feel anxiety about, like, is this what I should be doing? Is this the smart thing to do? Um, and once I took control of my finances, I sort of found that a lot of problems went away, like a lot of impulsive spending that uh, it kind of fell away naturally in a way that didn't happen when I was really trying to focus on specific things like eating out less, um, and other specific areas. Like when I was focusing on trying to rid myself of those habits in particular, I was having a really hard time. And once I started to understand me a bit more, those things just sort of, I don't want to say solve themselves, but it became very easy to get control of impulsive behaviors in other areas.
So it expanded from just controlling your finances to other areas of your life, which, Angela, you
Exactly.
talk about that a lot too, how it's not just about the money and the finances. That's a big part of it, but it's about controlling and mindfulness in everything you do.
Yeah, Brandon, we talk a lot about impulses, which you just mentioned as a big problem, and sometimes impulses can be dictated by stress or anxiety, or euphoria can bring along impulsive behavior. And one of the core values that we have at the spending window is you need to be mindful of your spending in order to improve your financial health. And if you don't start thinking about it, it's never going to happen. And another thing that we saw that really overlapped with what you messaged to your listeners and viewers are that it's really about a lifestyle change. It's not a get rich quick scheme. There's no, it's not like a fad diet or a quick weight loss program. It's about changing a mental state, a mindset that can really translate into big gains. And we really saw that come through in some of your messaging as well.
Yeah, the way I try to describe that to people is it's like if you know, come into a large sum of money when you have poor habits, it'll be a mess. Like you'll spend it very quickly. But if you sort of get rich over a longer period of time, like say several decades, and you build good habits along the way, then suddenly even a lesser amount of money. Like I know we often think of wealth on the scale of like Jeff Bezos, which is like billions and billions of dollars, but um, you know, $1 million is a lot to live with and to even retire with. So if you have the mindset of spending $1 million, you think that's a house, that's like a house, a couple nice cars, and a few years of living expenses maybe. But then once you build habits and you know how to control your money, it be so more.
I totally agree. I think one of the things I see, and I first saw your messaging on Twitter, and Twitter Finance or Finance Twitter is really focused on side gigs, hustles, making that extra money, growing, investing, that kind of thing. And what I feel is missing on that for the long term is yes, you can always ask for a raise and always try and get more money. And that is a great thing to do. You should do that. But at the same time, if you don't control your spending, then you're just going to get that money and it's going to go right out the window. And so, do you feel, thinking about you and your peers, now you're in Toronto, right? So, you live in a city or near a city, and your peers, your demographics, or your age group, this group of people, are you an outlier, or or is your generation feeling and your peers feeling the same way as you do about this slow growth, spending focus, control focus?
I think a lot of like my immediate peers, they have challenges with money from the perspective. It's not even like the idea of growth and controlling it is not even in their vocabulary because they feel disenfranchised for a number of reasons. Like rent is super high in Toronto. They feel like their jobs aren't paying enough, and so it's sort of and that's another reason I started writing, was because I wanted to try and reach those people and say, yes, you can. There are some valid complaints, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't care at all. So it's sort of like a completely different conversation than most of my immediate peers, like the people that I hang out with, are having. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. Do you feel that they look at you differently when you might have more control or less of a impulsivity? Meaning, like in social situations, are you shunned because? And I'm guessing now. I'm guessing that you're the type of person that's not just going to go out and start spending money haphazardly.
No,
Does that come across to your friends as you're the responsible one?
it's funny because in college I was completely not like that. I was the irresponsible one, and so I get a lot of questions. It's not like they're not they don't despise me or anything like that. I don't think, but I get a lot of questions, and I try not to be too forward with it. Like I encourage people to have fun. Like I won't stop somebody from doing something unless they specifically ask for my advice. So I try not to be too forward with it. But in terms of it's been an interesting shift over the past few years, I'd say, because in college I used to be the reckless one, um, and that changed pretty rapidly over the course of a couple years.
Absolutely. Angela, we talk about not forcing things upon people, not forcing the traditional budget, which works for a lot of people. Hey, this is your budget, create a budget. But for most people, they don't like that. They don't like being pigeonholed into doing things. And what Brandon just said, he doesn't like to just, unless people are asking for it, he's not going to berate them for spending money. That's kind of what the spending window does too. In a way, it allows people to kind of have more fun with it, or at least more flexibility and allow for the spending, but just in a different way.
We've always talked about keeping up with the Joneses, and Brandon, you list some of the reasons that people have trouble financially, and it's because you live outside your means, or you try and look rich, richer than you are, or try and keep up with others. And we live in a society where there's always something coming down the pike that could take some of your funds away. It might be the next iPhone, it might be the next automobile, it might be some kind of education expense that you, or something that you feel like you quote unquote need. So what advice do you give, particularly the younger folks out there, who live and are surrounded by peers where you feel like you need to keep up, and it's almost like an arms race you're trying to keep up with? How do you advise them to get started? Because if you don't start to recognize some of those habits, you'll never be able to change them.
Yeah, I'd say, to think of it, like it really is an arms race. It sort of never ends. Once you, because there's always going to be people that are richer than you. And so you're never going to, like, I give a classic example. Like, I really like watches. And so when I first got into watches, something like, and maybe this will go over people's heads if they're not into watches, but something like, an Omega seemed like the highest level of watch to me. Like that was the coolest thing you could have. And then I got into Omega, and suddenly there's Rolex above it, and then you
Yeah.
get into Rolex, and suddenly there's even more above it. It's like it never ends. So I think I don't think it's bad to have nice things and enjoy nice things, but you have to approach those nice things from the perspective of, this is something I can not only afford, but it's something I enjoy, regardless of what anyone else has. So, I think that's the best way to approach so-called status symbols. It's for you, it's not for anybody else. And it's not a comparison thing, because you'll never get out of the comparison loop. It just keeps going.
That's so well put. Dan and I have spoken about, if you're passionate about something, be it watches or a certain clothing or a certain activity, that's great. You should pursue it, and if it brings you joy. But as a society, sometimes we feel like we need to be involved in everything. You need to have the best car, you need to have the best vacation, you need to have the best clothing. The best, you name it. So you really need to choose where you want to focus your attention and energy, and it should be something that brings you some value and joy. But as you said, don't do it for the sake of just keeping up with everybody else, because you'll never win. You'll never,
Yeah.
there's no finish line.
There will always be snobs that sort of look at what you have and say, I have something so much better. It's like there's no object in the world that's, universally the best in its class. It's like there's always something more.
Brendan, before you met me and we're talking, I didn't know that you were the reckless one in college, right? So that adds a whole new element to this that I didn't realize. You're talking, or at least you're getting to a point where you're being much more controlled and much more mindful with your spending. What did you do to make that switch? Was there an event? Was it just, did you read a book? What made you switch from being reckless to being much, or at least trying to be much more in control?
So there were a few things. I read a book called I Will Teach You to Be Rich by Ramit Sethi, and that sort of like gelled everything together for me. But along the way, there were a lot of little things. Like for example, probably the biggest thing was I got into investing, and that sort of reshaped how I think about spending money, because suddenly I wasn't thinking spend $200. I was thinking in terms of, like I'm spending the $2,000 this could be if I invested it until retirement. So that really reshaped my thinking about money.
A lot of people don't realize spending today is actually spending your future self. And not just money, but time as well. What you're focused on, things and that's, one of the big regrets from people is what they did with their time. But the people that I meet that are retiring don't have the money. They say, man, I really enjoyed my 20s, but I wish I would have started investing sooner. So it sounds like you got that bug and you're saying, hey, I can invest this money or I can buy an extra beer, a round of beers. I think I'd rather have this $100 be 1,000 10 years from now or 20 years from now. That's a really tough one to do. That delayed gratification is one of the most elusive things in North America. And you seem
Right.
to, or at least come close to finding it. I still struggle with it. Angelo still struggles with it. You're right. You're always going to have that struggle, but you're almost there. You're getting there. That's great.
I still do, have fun. I just, sort of set goals. So, like, I'll say I want to save or invest, X amount of money every month, and then outside of that, it's like a free for all. Once I hit that target, I can just sort of do whatever. And I think that's a good way to balance both.
And that's kind of where we are with intermittent spending. So we set and it's so customized for people. It's okay, here are the timelines. We actually talk about timing. Here's the time that you can spend money. You do it by here's how much I can spend, which is fine. We're saying do something. Set some sort of parameter so that when you're not in the spending window, when your window's open, you could just do what you want. You could focus on what you want. And that's the beauty of what you just described. I have my money, I saved it. Now I could do what I want with this money. So if I want to be frivolous or if I want to give to charity or whatever I want to do, that's okay. And I'm comfortable with it. You're comfortable with it. That's a whole lot easier to do than this every time you're going to make a purchase, think, oh my God, I shouldn't be doing this. You know, it's a lot easier to set these broader time windows or money amounts that you can then, once you've done it, you can make the decisions easier. All the other decisions are less restrictive, I should say.
Exactly. Yeah. And then you can, once you have a plan, you can sort of compensate along the way for it. You don't have to think about, spend like every single transaction. You can look at the big picture and say, am I on course? Like it becomes a very simple equation. You're either on course or you're not on course. And so you can compensate.
Yeah, one of the concepts that we promoted on the spending window is just putting a little bit of a pause. When that temporal relationship with spending is not really developed or explored. We always talk about the quantity or the amount you spend, and we thought the when kind of translated into how as well. And just by putting that little pause, just that little chance to think about this, hey, do I really need to buy those pair of sneakers right now, or maybe a few hours later when I'm not so emotional, I may reassess that in a different way. And that was one of the concepts that we were trying to promote. What do you notice are some of the biggest impulses that people fall victim to with their spending habits that they may want to initiate maybe a pause like we're recommending?
So I think like food is one that was for me, like eating out at restaurants. That's always been a huge challenge because I love food. So like when I travel, food is probably the biggest budget item aside from accommodations. Um, and also, bigger things like cars and the places they live. Like cars, everybody wants, or most people want, the shiniest new thing around. And so it's very easy to just kind of go to the dealership and they'll try to get you to buy something that same day. But also, living as far as living arrangements, I know a lot of people who moved from more rural parts of Canada to the city in Toronto. Just and it seemed like impulsive because it didn't seem very thought out. Like they just thought, I'm going to come to Toronto and I need to be downtown. Like because I need to be, 10 minutes away from work, not realizing and not stopping to think that there are suburbs where rent is like half as much and you're still only like a half hour away from the city core. So I think those three things: food, cars, and housing.
Then they're the biggies, right? They're the
Yeah.
biggies. And I guess the advice would be don't make those big decisions when your spending window's open, or don't go to the car dealer when your spending window's open. Go when it's closed so you can just do research, and then you can walk away and then think and reflect, because it is a big decision. A car you can't just sell. You could drive it off the lot and sell. You're out 20% right there.
Exactly.
You
Yeah.
know, so I think it's a really good point. The problem is when you're traveling, sometimes you can't. There's nothing you can do about food because you just don't have you can't cook for yourself or
Right.
anything like that.
Yeah.
And then when you're somewhere new, you got to try it. If we're going up to Canada, we would try the poutine or whatever you got up there. So quick question for you, Brennan. You're working on a lot of different stuff. I see your posts. You go all different financial topics. Is there any topic that you're working on, you're thinking about exploring a little further currently, or any hot topics that you're really interested in?
So I'm always thinking about topics that can reach people that are, in that in that state of disenfranchisement that I mentioned earlier. And it's an ongoing thing I always think about when I'm finding new topics to write. Um, so I don't have any concrete ideas for like I've done a few like budgeting on minimum wage, reasons people find it hard to save, things like that. But I'm always looking for more to do to reach that particular audience.
And you're trying to reach. Are there any? Is there a demographic you're trying to reach? You said disenfranchised. Is there age, or are you just anybody? Because that was one of your core principles. Anybody can learn this.
Right.
Anybody can change. Although it's harder to teach an old dog new tricks, for sure.
Exactly. Uh, because of who I hang out with and who I have the most conversations with, it's definitely like, the 20 to 30 range, which I feel like, based on my conversations, that seems to be the core demographic of people who are really, really disenfranchised. Just thinking like the entire financial system needs to be dismantled. And so I see that as a challenge because I don't agree with, extreme measures against money as a whole, but at the same time, I understand where people are coming from, and so I take it as a challenge to kind of communicate with them and get them, moving in the right direction personally.
So Rinkydoo Finance, what's your vision here? And if listeners haven't seen it, it's just Rinkydoo. Is it rinkydoo.com or is it Rinkydoo? It's rinkydoofinance.com.
Right. Yeah. Rinkydoofinance.com.
I suggest anyone that hasn't gone there, check it out, because some of those blog posts, Angela, you were looking at the other day saying, wow, this is a really interesting stuff. All of it was interesting and and relevant, right? Like on target. There wasn't any. I don't think there was any outliers. I didn't notice any.
Yeah, I try to stay on topic. I try not to go, too crazy with the viral stuff. It's really so my strategy for finding articles and topics to write is like I really look at there's software I use to really look at what people are searching for. And so I write topics, that I believe I can contribute to with my vision, but also that people are actually looking to read. So I think it helps to sort of appeal to people. I always get that comment when I talk to people. They say, these are topics like they're really interesting, like things I actually want to learn about, and it's because a lot of people do want to learn about it. So that's why I kind of pick the topics.
And then, one topic that jumped at me, Brandon, and by the way, before I mention that, it's so well articulated on the website. It's clear you know how to write, you know how to relay ideas in a way that are digestible and meaningful to people. And one of them was, I think, 100 places to hide money in your house. I didn't even know to think about that stuff, but I never thought to hide money in a tennis ball. It was very interesting. So, great.
Now you can't hide it there. Actually, you can. I think the people that are going to steal it from you aren't watching that. Right? Aren't watching.
That was the problem with that post, because I realized as I was finishing it, I was like, burglars are probably going to be looking this up.
I'm looking at a lamp here behind you, Brandon. Maybe I got to check that light bulb or something.
Inside it, yeah. Yeah, that was a fun one. Like that, I occasionally do like it's not really financial advice. Like I wouldn't personally recommend that you hide money in a tennis ball. But it's if you had to, you could do it.
I like it. I kind of like it. I'm thinking about that right now. Um, well, I'm gonna ask you one more question, but before I do, is there anything you want to say about what you're doing, or anything you want to promote, or at least get to shout out to people before I ask you a question?
So it's always tough for me to give shout outs because I've met so many great people on Twitter. But what I would say is, if you follow me on Twitter, you'll see, I do my best every day to highlight people that I feel are really doing a good job. So you'll see me quote tweeting them, replying to them, retweeting them, that sort of thing. So I'd really suggest, if you're looking for new ideas and people in personal finance, just give me a follow. It's at Rinkydoo Finance on Twitter.
That's Twitter, Ange, and we're in our 40s, so we're kind of the dinosaurs if we go on Twitter. We're the old folk on Twitter for sure. So you're in the right audience. You got the right audience, for the right platform, I should say, for your audience, Brandon.
Nice.
All right. So my question is this: you know, you're, I would say, and I think Angela would agree with me, you're above the grade in terms of your thinking, level of thinking for your age. People takes a while to start thinking about that. And it's just natural progression. So if you could give one piece of advice, one piece of financial advice regarding spending to people, what would it be?
That's a good question. Let me think about it for a second.
Yeah, and we talk about spending, so we kind of lead with that, but we believe you can always get more money, but controlling it is more important. So you have any advice to people about spending in particular?
So I would say, and it's what worked for me, is start thinking about what money ultimately means to you, not only now, but years from now. What will having, 10 times, so let's say you're thinking about spending $200. What will having $2,000 20 or 30 years from now mean to you versus what you're about to buy, what it means to you? So do that comparison. And I think people will find that solves a lot of the difficult thinking about money, because now you're thinking about delayed gratification, which can be tough, yes, but I think a lot of people will find that having 10 times the amount of money in 20 or 30 years means a lot more to them than whatever they're about to buy today.
Absolutely. I like that. I like that. What about you, Ange? Think that's a good piece of advice?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Very well put.
Thank you.
Well, I'm just going to put my little disclaimer on here. We are not providing financial guidance, so don't give us a hard time about that, everybody. But Brandon, thank you so much for coming on today. Great job. I really enjoy your work. Keep it up. Rinkydoo Finance, everybody. Thanks a lot. And stay tuned for our next show. We're going to release these different guests, different topics, and really appreciate you listening. Go to spendingwindow.com for more.
Thank you very much, guys.